Hi everyone, welcome to Emma, a true infidelity story. I'm excited to share a new story with you. I had always been a quiet observer of the little things, the tiny details that others overlooked in the rush of life. My husband Cooper was no exception. I knew his routines, his morning coffee with the newspaper, the soft hum of his voice when he called to check in from work, and the way he'd absent-minded leave his shoes in the hallway when he was in a rush. But this time, when he left for his business trip, there was something different about the air in our home, something empty. The house, once filled with his constant presence, seemed hollow. Now it was strange how silence could feel so loud. Our cute dog Milo was always a source of comfort for me, his loyalty unwavering. He'd lie next to me at night, his warm body a reassurance that I wasn't truly alone. Cooper was gone for 3 weeks, and I didn't think much of it at first. But something started to change during those days. Milo, usually calm and affectionate, became strangely distant. At first I brushed it off as his way of dealing with Cooper's absence, but it kept nagging at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I remember one afternoon, the sunlight spilling through the kitchen windows, as I washed dishes, the soft clink of plates filling the air. Milo, who had been lying at my feet moments before, suddenly stood up and walked to the door. He looked back at me, his eyes wide, filled with a strange intensity. I didn't understand it at first, but the way he stared at the door felt different. It was almost as if he was waiting for someone. "Milo, what is it, boy?" I whispered, leaning down to stroke his fur. But he didn't respond in his usual way. He just stared, ears perked, tail stiff. That night the feeling grew stronger. I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in our bed, the sheets cold without Cooper beside me. Milo remained at the foot of the bed, his eyes fixed on the bedroom door. I couldn't stop thinking about how out of place everything felt, how everything had shifted in those few days since Cooper left. There was something unsettling about Milo's behavior, a kind of quiet unease. I couldn't explain, and yet I couldn't bring myself to confront. Was I just imagining things? The next few days felt like a blur. I went through the motions, checking off each task on my to-do list, but it was as though I was operating on autopilot. And then one evening, as I was out for a walk with Milo, I saw something that made my heart stop in my ch***t, a text from Cooper. I hadn't heard from him all day, which was unusual, and his message was simple. "I'll be home soon. Just one more thing to handle here." But there was something in the message, something that struck me as off. It was vague, distant. It didn't sound like him. And then, as I stood there staring at the screen, Milo suddenly tugged on his leash, pulling me towards a spot near the bushes. He stopped, sniffed the ground, and turned his head sharply to look at me, his gaze almost accusatory. I couldn't shake the feeling that Milo knew something I didn't. The next morning, as I went about my routine, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. It was addressed to me, but the handwriting wasn't Cooper. My stomach dropped as I opened it, the contents revealing something I had never expected to find, something I couldn't bring myself to read at first: a name, a phone number, and a date. My hands trembled as I held the paper, my mind racing to make sense of it. Who was this person? Why was this here? And why hadn't Cooper mentioned anything about it? My heart felt heavy, as though the weight of everything that had been building inside me had finally come crashing down. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but the evidence was undeniable. This was more than just a slip-up. It was a sign, something I couldn't ignore any longer. I spent the rest of the day in a day, my mind running through every possible explanation, but nothing made sense. Milo's strange behavior, the unexpected envelope, Cooper's odd messages. All of it seemed connected in some way. And yet part of me was still hoping that I was just overthinking things, that I was jumping to conclusions. That evening I sat on the couch with Milo, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. Milo sat beside me, his head resting on my lap, and for the first time in days I felt a sense of peace. It was as though he understood, as if he could feel the turmoil inside me. His presence was comforting, but also strangely unsettling. There was a part of me that wanted to ask him, "What did you know? What are you trying to tell me?" I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew this something was about to change. The days after finding the envelope passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking on the edge of something I wasn't ready to face. Milo continued to act distant, as if he knew what I was feeling. He would wander around the house, stop and stare at the door like he was waiting for someone to come in. At night, he would curl up at the foot of the bed, his eyes wide open, fixed on the corner of the room, as if he was guarding against something I couldn't see. The unease that had settled into my ***T grew heavier with each passing hour. I didn't know what to do with the envelope. The name and number seemed like a clue, but it felt like a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. I wanted to confront Cooper. I wanted to ask him about it, demand an explanation. But something inside me kept holding me back. The thought of hearing the truth, whatever it might be, scared me in ways I couldn't put into words. I spent the next few days in a kind of limbo. I went to work, tried to keep up with the normal routines, but everything felt off. My mind kept drifting back to the envelope, to the strange distance between Cooper and me, to Milo's silent watchfulness. I kept wondering, what was I missing? Why was this happening? And then one afternoon the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but my gut told me it was important. My heart pounded in my ***T as I answered, my voice trembling even before I spoke. The person on the other end didn't waste any time. "Is this my name?" the voice asked. Low and steady. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "I think you should know something," the voice continued. "I don't want to cause any trouble, but I can't stay quiet anymore." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the kind of phone call I was expecting. I could hear the anxiety in the voice, the hesitation, but there was also a kind of certainty. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm the person your husband's been seeing while he's been away." I didn't want it to go on like this, but it's been happening for months. The voice said, "I don't know what you know, but I thought you should hear it from me. He's been lying to you." My world stopped, my body went numb. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to feel. I just sat there, frozen, the weight of those words, sinking into me like a stone. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally managed to ask. "I just couldn't live with myself anymore," the voice replied, sounding almost apologetic. "I don't expect you to understand, but he's been different with you, distant. He's been seeing someone else." "I'm sorry." The line went silent for a moment. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. It wasn't the confirmation of everything I had been fearing. It wasn't this feeling of betrayal that twisted in my gut, sharp and cold. "I'm sorry," the voice repeated. "I just thought you should know the truth." And then the call ended. I sat there staring at the phone, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Cooper to demand an explanation, but another part of me was terrified of hearing the truth from his mouth. How could I face him now? How could I go back to the life we had before? The life that felt so safe, so certain. Now it felt like a lie. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked over to Milo. He was lying on the couch, his head resting on his paws as though he was waiting for me. I reached down to pet him, and he looked up at me with those wide-eyed, knowing eyes. It was almost as if he understood, as if he could feel the storm inside me. I buried my face in his fur, trying to find some sense of calm, some sense of grounding. That night, Cooper called. He told me he was on his way home, that his trip had been longer than expected, but his voice was flat, distant, and I could hear the tension in his words. It was like he knew something had changed between us, like he knew I was no longer blind to the truth. I didn't say anything about the phone call. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. Not when I felt like I was still in the dark, fumbling for answers. But I knew one thing for sure. Things could never be the same between us again. The illusion had been shattered, and I was left to pick up the pieces, and Milo, who had been my silent companion through it all, seemed to understand that better than anyone else. The Dan Cooper came home was a blur. I barely registered the sound of the front door opening, or the familiar scent of his cologne wafting into the living room. My thoughts were consumed by everything I had learned, everything I still didn't know. I was standing in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter as I tried to steady my breath when I heard his voice. "I'm home," he said, almost too casually, like he hadn't just been gone for 3 weeks, like nothing had changed. Milo, who had been sitting by the door, his tail wagging excitedly, as if nothing was wrong, now stood still. He stared at Cooper for a moment before turning his head away, almost as if he didn't recognize him. I wasn't sure if it was my emotions clouding my judgment, or if Milo was sensing the same shift in the air that I was. There was a tension now, something that wasn't there before I turned around. Slowly meeting Cooper's gaze, I tried to read his face to find any sign that he knew I knew, but he was good at hiding things too good. His eyes were unreadable, but there was a flicker of something there, a hesitation that didn't escape me. It was like he was waiting for me to speak first, waiting for me to make the first move well. I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. My heart was pounding in my ch***t, each beat louder than the next. How was your trip? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Same old, he replied, shrugging it off like it was just another routine business trip, like nothing had changed. But I could feel the distance between us growing thick and suffocating. Cooper. My voice cracked as I said his name. I didn't know how to start, how to bring up what was tearing me apart inside. I had spent so many hours thinking about this moment, imagining how I would confront him. But now that it was finally here, I felt lost. He looked at me, his expression softening slightly, but I could see the wariness in his eyes. What's going on? He asked, his voice low, almost too casual. You seem off. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking, and for a moment I wondered if I'd even be able to speak the words that had been sitting in my throat for days. I had to. I couldn't keep living in this lie, in this silence that had stretched out between us. I know about her, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the weight of those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I saw his expression change, a brief flash of panic crossing his face, before he quickly masked it with a forced calm. But I knew he wasn't as composed as he wanted me to believe. His lips parted, but no words came out. At first, he swallowed hard, and I could feel the heat of his gaze on me, like he was trying to gauge how much I really knew, how deep the wound went. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally said, but the lie was thin, too thin to hold up. The room felt colder with every passing second, and I could hear the sound of Milo's claws clicking on the floor as he paced restless, sensing the tension building between us. I know everything, I whispered, my eyes locked onto his, not letting him look away. I know about the messages, the phone number, the lies you've been telling me. I know about her. Cooper's face twisted in frustration, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat for the first time. I saw him vulnerable, truly vulnerable. I hadn't seen that side of him in years. He was a man who had always been in control, always had an answer for everything. But now he was speechless. I'm sorry, okay, he said. Finally, his voice strained. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you. I shook my head, the sting of his words cutting deeper than I expected. But you did, Cooper. You hurt me, and not just me. You've hurt us. You've been lying to me for months. My voice wavered with emotion, but I couldn't stop myself. The anger and hurt that had been building up inside me for so long spilled out raw and unfiltered. I don't even know who you are anymore. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out, as if he wanted to touch me to comfort me. But I took a step back. I couldn't. I didn't want his touch anymore, not now, not after everything. I never wanted this to happen, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. I don't know what happened to us, but I swear it's not what you think. I still love you. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and empty. I couldn't bring myself to believe him. Not after everything. Not after how much I had felt, how much I had already lost. I don't know what to do with this, I murmured, my voice breaking as I spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you. The words tasted like poison in my mouth, but they were the truth. Milo, who had been pacing anxiously at my feet, suddenly stopped and sat down, staring at us with those same wide, knowing eyes. It was like he understood the weight of the moment, the gravity of what was happening. He didn't move, he just sat there waiting. Cooper's eyes softened, but the tension in the room never left. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and I wondered if he was really seeing me at all, or if he was just trying to salvage whatever part of us was still there. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly, but it didn't feel like enough, not after everything. I turned away from him, the pain too much to bear. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. The days after that conversation felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything unclear and distorted. Cooper stayed home for a few days after our confrontation, but I could feel the space between us grow wider with every passing hour. It was like we were strangers, three people who once shared a life, but had nothing left to say. Every word he spoke felt hollow, and every gesture he made felt like a desperate attempt to fix something that had already been broken beyond repair. I tried to go through the motions, cooking, cleaning, taking care of Milo, but nothing felt right. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a prison filled with reminders of everything that had gone wrong. Cooper's presence, which used to comfort me, now made my skin crawl. It was like I was suffocating in a life that didn't belong to me anymore. I knew I had to make a decision, but I didn't know what that decision should be. The nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the silence between us. Cooper would fall asleep beside me, his breathing steady and peaceful, while I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. The truth was out, and yet it didn't make anything easier, just made everything more complicated. How could I forgive him? How could I go back to pretending everything was okay when I felt so lost? Milo, ever faithful, would lie next to me, his warmth, a small comfort in the dark. He would nudge my hand with his nose, as if trying to remind me that I wasn't completely alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been betrayed, not just by Cooper, but by the life I had built with him, by the trust one had placed in someone who had broken it so easily. Then came the day when Cooper finally spoke the words that had been hanging in the air between us for so long. He sat me down in the living room, his face a mask of exhaustion and regret. He looked older somehow, like the weight of what he had done was slowly draining him. "I know I can't fix this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know where to start, but I need you to know that I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen." I stared at him, the words sinking in, but not fully reaching me. I didn't know if I could believe him anymore. How could I? How could I ever trust him again after everything? "I know," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper, "but you already have." He seemed to wilt under the weight of my words, his shoulders slumping, as if the air had been sucked out of him. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. We just sat there in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say next. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. Part of me still wanted the life we had wanted, to believe that things could go back to the way they were, but another part of me was terrified of that idea, terrified of falling back into a routine that had been built on lies, terrified of allowing myself to be hurt again. I didn't know if I could go on like this, pretending everything was fine. When my heart was still breaking, Milo walked over and sat beside me, his head resting on my knee, as if trying to offer me some kind of reassurance. I looked down at him, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, but also realizing that he was the one constant in my life. He was the one thing that hadn't changed, the one being who had never betrayed me. It was comforting, but it also made everything else feel even more uncertain. I looked at Cooper again, his face etched with guilt and sadness. I saw the man who had once been my husband, the man I had loved. But now I couldn't quite remember how it felt to be close to him, to trust him. "I don't know what's next," I said, my voice shaky, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Cooper's face softened, and for a moment I thought he might reach for me, might beg me to stay. But he didn't. He just nodded, his eyes full of regret, as if he knew that he had already lost me. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you like this. I never wanted to be the reason you felt like this." The finality in his voice hit me like a wave, and for the first time, I felt like the door was closing between us. I didn't know if it was the right decision or not, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in this limbo, this space where nothing was real anymore. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and looked down at Milo. "Come on, buddy," I whispered, reaching for his leash. He stood up and walked over to me, his tail wagging, and together we walked out the door. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever find a way to forgive Cooper, or if I would even want to. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making a choice for myself, and that in itself was a start. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. It wasn't the end, but it was a new beginning, one where I had the chance to find myself again. And maybe, just maybe, that was all I needed, right? If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us craft more engaging stories for you.